In this segment, I want to discuss how to get your sound. Now, that's one of the most important things because I've said you want to be able to say a lot with one note. Great blues players have a real strong sound, very expressive sound. And notice I've changed guitars. I've got a custom style Strat here. It's not really a Fender, but it has Texas Special single coils. So I'll be on the neck for that Texas blues sound. And the reason I'm doing this is that I'm going to talk about how to get certain overtones and a lot of bite, that trashy kind of digging in blues sound. Remember that single coils are going to react differently than humbuckers. They're a little more expressive, a little more dynamic range on them. So we'll talk about things on the right and left hand. Now earlier I mentioned that my viewpoint is that the left hand is the athlete and the right hand is the artist. Obviously your left hand is very important for sustain. We talked about that. And how clean you are, and also your tone. But your right hand is really important because you attack the string, you shade it different ways, you get different tonal variations. So let's talk a lot about the right hand. Now I'm using a Fender extra heavy pick for what I want here, and I've got 11s on this guitar and I'm tuned to standard pitch. So that means I've got enough resistance that I can dig in. Now I do all my own setups on my guitars, my own fretwork and everything, and I'm a real stickler about setups. So you'd use a different setup. This isn't really set up for blues. I have less relief on this. This is more of a fusion style setup. I probably have, 6/1000 of an inch relief at the 9th fret. If you don't know how to set your relief, it's really quite simple. Go to Stewart McDonald. They're a mail order company that they have guitar luthier supplies. Buy yourself a precision straight edge. It's stainless steel. I think it'll cost you 70 or 80 bucks. Take care of it. But you simply lay it across the frets, holding the guitar in your playing position. Don't hold it flat because your neck will actually backbow some. Carefully hold it up there. You don't want to scratch the guitar or drop it. Then you get a set of feeler gauges. Now I'm an old hot rodder. I like to work on my cycles and my cars and stuff. So feeler gauges are something we use all the time. Feeler gauges are strips of metal that are certain thickness. So they're either, 2/1000 on up to 25, 30, 40,000 of an inch. You take the feeler gauge and you simply check to see what your clearance is. And you adjust the truss rod. Now, a Fender, you don't have to worry about breaking the truss rod. Don't get crazy and get a big pipe wrench. But Gibsons and things like that, you might have to be a little more careful. By the way, next shift. Now we're down here in Florida, so we get humidity, we get hurricanes. In the winter we might have a couple of days of cold weather, so we got the heat on. I've got a lot of guitars, and they sit in storage upright in the cases, and the necks can shift. So I'm constantly checking because you don't want to leave a guitar in a back bow position or with a front bow. And a lot of times I'll do repairs on students' guitars and things like that, and it's a problem because it's been sitting one way, and you know how wood is. So I didn't mean for this to turn into a discussion of guitar setup, but it's critical because relief affects your tone. Now blues players will run more relief frequently. There are a couple of reasons. It gets a little less presence, a little throatier, more mid-range, a thicker tone. And also when you're bending strings, it gives you a different feel. You get a little more resistance, and it can affect the potential for string noise. If you have too little relief, sometimes it's actually more difficult to play when you're bending strings. This also goes to the issue of nut setup. The nut is one of the most poorly set up items on most guitars. I've got a lot of guitars ranging from rather inexpensive to very expensive, and frequently that's a problematic area. I'll have to go in and adjust that. Those should be set, and the settings that I like, some people like them really, really low, but because I've played classical guitar, I like to have some resistance there. I won't set the treble strings, that's the distance between the string and the top of the first fret, any lower than 18/1000. 20 is ideal for me. I've got to have something to grab onto. If I pick up a guitar that's got 5 or 8, man, there's nothing to grab there. And actually, it's harder for me to play something like that. On the bass side, I'll run it on over to maybe 20. I used to run from 20 to 30, but I've set it down quite a bit more nowadays, and it evens out and balances the voices. Now, this issue of setting up the nut, if you don't know how to do that you might want to leave to a professional, but be particular. Make sure the guy takes his time, give him the specs that you want, and maybe get a cheap guitar and experiment with that. But remember, the first thing is set your neck release, because that's going to, however the neck is set, then you set the nut, then you set your action. And when you set your action, use a capo on the first fret. Now action, that's going to affect a lot of things. Now if you have a real high action, that's going to enable you to really dig in. You can have a wider dynamic range, which means you can hit the guitar harder or softer, and it'll be more expressive. I don't have a real high action on this guitar. I'd say it's medium, but I don't like it so low that I hear buzzes and rattles. That's very important for me because if I'm walking on eggshells, I just can't play. Remember, I've played classical guitar for a real long time, and on that you don't want any buzzes at all, so I'm used to a higher action. Getting used to that resistance helps, and again, because I play bass, I'm used to having that. All right, enough about this setup business. So once your guitar is set up the way that you want, and this is an ongoing issue, you want to practice this sort of thing, Then you want to start addressing the right hand. Now in the next segment, I'm going to discuss in depth this right hand. I've spent a long time teaching and watching different people play. Students from beginners to advanced come in, and everybody has their own way of approaching the guitar anatomically. Very few people just come in and automatically fall into an ideal, efficient hand position. Frequently, the hardest thing is when someone comes in, they've got muscle memory ingrained. Now if you're one of those guys or girls that's been playing for a while and you have a bad habit, I can't overemphasize the importance of breaking bad habits. They will limit you. Yeah, you can take things to a certain degree, but it's also not just limit you on technical speed and things like that and efficiency, it's going to limit you on your palette of sounds. Again, I'm going to go back to classical guitar playing. In classical guitar, you use your nails in the flesh and you shade the notes all these different ways. You have a little orchestra so you can get all these different sounds. When I studied classical, it just changed the whole concept of how to play with a pick. I suddenly said, well, I've got all these options playing with the fingers. Let me explore the right hand. All right, so in the next section, we're going to talk about ideas of getting different sounds for different blues styles.